All right, so I want to come here live to talk about critical race theory. Now, there's people that's making argument regarding to how they feel about critical race theory. Some people say that it needs to be discussed. There's others that saying that it does not need to be spoken of. So before I give my commentaries and thoughts on it, I want to go into what critical race theory is. So critical race theory is an academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists in the United States who seek to critically examine U.S. laws as it intersects with the issue of race in the United States, and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice. CRT examines social, cultural, and legal issues as they relate to race and racism in the United States, and more recently England, Canada, and Australia. And it says it emphasizes how racism, disparate racial outcomes can be the result of complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics rather than explicit and intentional prejudice on the part of individuals. It also views race and white supremacy as an intersectional social construction, which serves to oppress people of color and marginalized community at large. In the field of legal studies, CRT emphasizes that merely making laws colorblind on paper may not be enough to make the application of the laws colorblind. Ostensibly colorblind laws can be applied in racially discriminatory ways. Intersectionality, which emphasizes that race can intersect with other identities such as gender and class to produce complex combination of power and disadvantage, is a key CRT concept. All right. So I'm just gonna stop there. The question should be, why don't people want to talk about critical race theory? That should be the question. Why people don't want to talk about that? Why people don't want to get into that conversation in the public school system regarding to the critical race theory? I understand that it can be very complicated for children to learn these kind of things, because when it comes down to the origin of the history, especially here in the United States, the origin is very traumatizing, and nobody wants to relive that or go back into the historical events that happened. But you have to understand what took place to what is going on now in the present time. If you don't go into the origin, if you don't go into the information, then you're not going to talk about history. So what's the purpose of having history if you're not going to talk about critical race theory? I mean, well, we're not supposed to be critically analyzing what's going on as far as racism is concerned, and how that affects people not socially, economically, politically, and culturally. I mean, yeah, there's monuments being taken down, of course. Yeah. I mean, some argue that, well, they made Juneteenth a holiday, a federal holiday. Yeah, but guess what? We didn't need Juneteenth to be a federal holiday. We didn't need permission from the government, because our people was already celebrating that. Okay, that doesn't defeat the point. So, to me, to sit here and say that we don't need to have that discussion about the CRT is basically disguising and trying to cover up information and trying to bring about some feel-good rhetoric, especially to the younger generation. And that's being disingenuous. It's very disingenuous to sit here and just put on this narrative and disguise and get rid of everything else that has a major effect and also has a major part in what is the current issue and why we are here today. So, or how we got into this predicament as African Americans. So to sit here and say, well, let's not talk about racial theories. Let's not get into that. To sit here and say, let's not get into that politics, is you're being dishonest. So where do I stand on my position? It needs to be talked about. And it needs to be exposed in its proper way. It needs to be going into the origins. History needs to be discussed from how things were for us as black people the moment we got here into this country all the way up to now. Not just a bit of pieces and something add on to it to make it sound good. But you gotta tell the origins. And you can't, and parents cannot rely on this public school system. It's up to the parents to really educate themselves, to get all the information so they can be able to properly educate their kids. So when their kids go into the public school or go into society, they already got the knowledge. They already know their history. And nobody can tell them different. Nobody can try to create some type of facade or try to falsify things to them, because they already know. So for me, I'm not impressed by the Confederate monuments being taken down and all of this other stuff. I'm not impressed by that. And I'm not so much impressed about Juneteenth being a federal holiday, because again, that was already a celebration for us. So I'm not impressed. And I'm definitely not impressed with the fact that they want to all of a sudden, this government want to all of a sudden tell you, let's not talk about critical race theory. Why? Why not? What, is it too intense? Is it too blunt? Is it too harsh? Where you can't handle it? I mean, it's very funny to me. It's very odd how the system tried to just downplay everything, want to try to change up something. So again, am I for that? Yes, it needs to be taught. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be a conversation, whether it's at out in the public, whether it's at home or school, or even at a workplace. Even at the workplace, sometimes, when you're talking amongst your co-workers, you might have this conversation. So it needs to be talked about, because things got to be addressed. If it don't get addressed, then there's not going to be enough solution to the problem. So there are things that need to be challenged. There needs to be questioned. And shout out to Tamir Rice's mother, because she's doing the right thing. She's doing exactly what she's supposed to do. Challenge not only these black organizations, but challenging the society in general, and using her thoughts, using her voice to point out the contradiction, the counter-revolutionary that's taking place. So I don't blame her. A lot of people think that, she shouldn't say anything about that, or she shouldn't speak on it. She has that right to. Because this was her child that was killed in 2014 by a police officer in Cleveland. So with that being said, that's what people got to do. They have to challenge the American liberal. They need to challenge American society, how they go about dealing with racial justice in this country. Now, for many of us, we heard about, what's the guy's name? Derek Chauvin. He got 22 and a half years in prison. Which I say, okay, that's great. I mean, hey, that's great. That's great he's locked up, right? It's a great thing. But for many of us, is 22 and a half years really long enough? Especially somebody that killed an innocent man in broad daylight and sat on his neck for 9 minutes. This man struggling to breathe. And the world saw it. But this man only got 22 and a half years. That's not really enough. That's not really enough to me. I mean, because he can get out anytime soon. You know what I'm saying? If it hadn't been my way, he would have got 50 years or more. And then the incident where the white officer that went inside that man's apartment in Dallas, Texas, or excuse me, in Fort Worth, Texas, and shot and killed this innocent brother, and all she got is 10 years and a hug and a little prayer. And you tell me that we shouldn't talk about critical race theory? We need to have that conversation. That conversation needs to be had. And all these other police officers that's walking away freely, and you're talking about critical race theory should not be discussed. It needs to be discussed. Because at this point, the authority need to be challenged. Or how they go about dealing with racial injustice. So, again, that's just my thought. And that's where I stand on my position. So, with that being said, we gonna have to continue on with this conversation, whether people like it or not. It needs to be spoke about. It needs to be told. Otherwise, you might as well not even tell history. You might as well not even talk about U.S. history if you don't want to talk about critical race theory. You might as well not even talk about it. You might as well not even talk about slavery. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say. And please check out my channel, Tiffany L. French, on YouTube. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, and look at my contents, share my contents. And until next time, I'll connect with you all later. All right.